So I'm here and I would like to start off with, something for all three of you. Integrating fiction and reality. Is it even necessary to integrate? Do you think fiction and uh, reality have to come together? Has fiction got to have anything to do with reality, or does reality need to be impacted by fiction? All three of you, one after the other. Short, succinct.
Good evening to all of you. I'm Gajra, and I alternate my work, my professional career in writing between the world of television and the world of books, which are two very contrasting worlds. But yes, I deal purely in fiction. And I think for the entertainment industry, particularly, it is very difficult yet very necessary to integrate reality and fiction because it's much like, reality is very depressing. Reality is something we need to escape from, and even if we need to present it, we have to sugarcoat that bitter pill is something that you get it gets ingrained into you, it gets fed to you the moment you enter your industry. I started with being a script associate on a film, and then I diversified into television. So whenever you approach important filmmakers or producers, and you take sort of realistic subjects which are not fantasy, subjects which are treated in a realistic manner. This is the gyan that we all have to listen to, and we have to take it very seriously. So there's no running away from the fact that in the entertainment industry, which is an expensive medium for putting forth your stories and what you want to say, it does become extremely necessary to integrate the two. So one has tried to do that with varying degrees of success, but yes, it's important.
I'll come back. I'll come to both of you. Just to land an idea. Many years ago, when Manmohan Desai was still alive, an interview he gave, he said, there are only two ways of making a film. Either do it my way or do it the Ray way. Satyajit Ray. There are only two kinds of films, so which is based on that. One is Amar Akbar Antony, which is rooted in nothing but a wonderfully goofy world, and one is the Pather Pachali, which is absolutely rooted in. So, Manjuji, bringing you into the conversation, as an academic, as somebody who writes on theory and who deals in the theory of literature, creativity, where do you come from in this?
I would like to go back to the question that you asked earlier. Folks, I'm Manju Jetka, and I've spent 5 decades teaching. I'm a creative writer too. Your question regarding is it necessary, what is better, fiction or reality? I would like to say that, see, all dreams begin in reality, and the two are interconnected. We are living in a world where everything is connected to everything else. And if we write stories, yes, the imagination takes us to different zones, and we do strike the right chord somewhere. And if we are focused only on reality, then we may not get that kind of reception from publishers and readers. So the two have to go hand in hand. I can only speak of my own experience, the experience that I've had. The academic writing that I did, for instance, that has an appreciative audience, but a small audience of researchers, academicians, students, and so on. But the creative writing went far, comparatively. I don't know how to market my books, otherwise perhaps it would have gone further, but it's okay, it's perfectly fine. Now, the creative writing had a lot of imagination in it, but when I tried to publish a memoir, then I kept banging on doors and there was no answer. Why? Because I wanted to publish a memoir on how difficult it is to bring up a disabled child. And nobody wanted to publish anything like that. Why? Because there are so many stories going around, young adult stories, young romance stories, imagination, fantasy, science fiction, horror stories, ghost stories. So why should anybody want to read something about bringing up a disabled child? So ultimately, I had to go on to Amazon Kindle and publish it there. Afterwards, it had a better life after publication. But what I'm trying to say is that the imagination appeals to the readers more than reality. However, the two have to go hand in hand. Most of us, when we started writing, our first books are always autobiographical or partly autobiographical. I thought maybe it was different in my case. I was self-conscious about it, that, I've based a novel on partly on my personal life. But then, as I started working on this encyclopedia that you just mentioned very kindly, the Routledge Encyclopedia of Indian Writing in English, we were dealing with 350 topics there. And out of those 350, there were 250 writers. And I found that all of them begin their stories taken from their personal life. So there has to be the reality, and to temper that reality, there has to be imagination. The other question, maybe I'll come around to it next time.
Smriti, if you could come in from the point of view of somebody who's transitioned from television and OTT into writing literature and literature of a mythological variety. So if you could just, and then I'll come up with.
Yeah, so to answer the fiction and reality question, and then coming to mytho, just to take the example of very recent biopics that have come out. And biopics, I think, are one format. I myself was on one for a sports biopic on a very celebrated sports person who plays hockey. And there's always, as storytellers, the huge challenge. First of all, a story has to be entertaining. But not all, in reality, our lives are not always as dramatic as, stories have to be. So a lot of times you would see, say, in films like Dangal, etc. also, there are no natural villains in everyone's lives. So, but the film needs one, the story needs one. So you would just say, pick up the coach and make him the villain. But in reality, he was actually somebody who was helping her, right? And of course, there was a whole legal battle also around it. But of course, they changed names, etc. But if the masses would just know, oh, that girl's coach. So, but the thing is, when you take, these days we really want to know real stories, which hence the popularity of so many biopics and biographies. But real life does not turn out as dramatic, and a lot of times it is our challenge to tweak it and insert drama. And it was the same thing with Sam Bahadur as well. What he's done is great, but the process of it, was it really as entertaining? Because it was all very dry and nuts and bolts, right? So
yeah, the film was also very dry and
that's what. But then the same filmmaker took another real incident, which was Talwar, and look at what she did with that. But look at what that was.
Yeah.
That needed an honest depiction, and both are very honest depictions, but both are different stories, and both were different incidents, and both were different characters, right? So one had that, pardon my language, but masala and scandal, and the other was just very pure, honest work, which doesn't have masala. So, and unnecessarily somebody chose not to put masala over there. But was it as well received as something else that is also in the market, that is extremely juicy and scandalous and creating a lot of buzz right now? No. Hence, one name has taken over and the other one has taken, unfortunately, a backseat, even in terms of business. So that is, as storytellers, are a huge challenge, that some places it is it's your decision to either add that masala, add that cheese into it, or just stay true to the reality of it. Because reality is not always as entertaining. It's only entertaining when it's on reality TV, as Big Boss, etc.
But then reality TV is not reality at all. Yeah.
Questionable, yeah. So, so when you're doing non-fiction, reality, There also you need to add in masala. When you're doing fiction, there you need to create masala. So in both ways, you need the masala. Sometimes it's just there naturally, sometimes it's just not there.
You see, I'll just come to this aspect of the masala thing and the villain aspect and what we are seeing in popular entertainment these days. Just to play the devil's advocate here, and I began with a mention of Satyajit Ray. His film Pother Pachali, and in fact, a lot of his films are characterized by the total absence of a villain. Right up to the 80s, when he first started feeling cynical about the world, he first had his first proper villain in a film called Ghore Baire, which is an adaptation of a Tagore novel, and then subsequently in Gano Shotru, which had another villain. His films, and Pother Panchali, for example, or the Opus series, is entirely without a villainous character. It's just the trials and tribulations of life, as ma'am mentioned, a memoir of somebody bringing up a disabled child. I don't think any fictional tale can provide, for want of a better term, a masala that can rival that kind of story. So in that, against that backdrop, like if all of you could come in, like we were talking about this, Gajra, that, a lot of the material that we see on OTT and contemporary cinema will come to books, not so much, at least not in India so far, which kind of thrive on sex, violence, cuss words, only on the uh, only on the reasoning that this is what is, like, of course, this is what we are looking at in society. You can't have they use cuss words like takya kalam, of course, all over. And I had this very intense discussion on a film called Baishe Shravan, which is one of the cult Bengali films, changed the course of modern Bengali cinema, where the director Srijit Mukherjee faced a lot of flack because he was using the language of the gutter, and his defense was, I am not talking about the Kolkata of the Bhadralok, no Howrah bridge, no Victoria terminal. I am talking about the alleys, about the underbelly, and my characters will not talk without one of those mother and sister galis. So, do you think that OTT, Gajra, we're talking about that also, OTT and other media is actually using that as a pretext and overplaying it? Do we need that overplay? Or, or is reality enough, the kind of reality that we see in, is it enough to be out there, to be portrayed like it is?
I completely agree with you on the fact that this so-called need for masala and what kind of masala, that makes all the difference. So on the OTT platforms, what I have been observing for a long time, and I felt pretty gratified because my recent outings where one is trying to understand how the market is changing, what are they now looking for, they themselves are realizing that, having this mother and sister galis and so much of sex and violence thrown in, and everybody's sort of, the viewers are almost thinking that this is happening in every second house. I mean, it's not that gutter like true either. So they are slowly realizing that people have had enough, and they're now looking at slightly more really realistic stories, which includes, I mean, we are talking about why is it, for example, a perception that women only watch television and they do not want to watch OTT. I think women want to watch intelligent content on OTT platforms, which makes them think, which sometimes challenges their, notions about life and about so many different areas of life that they want to know more about. So to assume that this is what sells and therefore this is the masala that will ensure I think that overkill has happened in OTT. If we are talking of very recent trends, so they're actually looking at stories now which are more human, which are more humane. Having said that, the classic markers which we have to answer for in the OTT, when we take subjects to OTT, is that spice and excitement level, which is slightly muted now, yet plays a lot on those two pillars which a good story always looks for, which is lots of emotion and lots of drama. I think we just need to get the skew right, because emotions are more realistic. Drama is not. Drama is sometimes melodrama, melodrama which may be very cleverly put across to the audience so it looks realistic, but end of the day, it is melodrama. You don't find so many shootings happening in every second gully and house, the way they are showing in a lot of OTT stories. So we need to find the right balance, according to me, and we also need to get rid of this extreme categorization कि टीवी पे तो ऐसे ही होता है या OTT में तो ये demand है. I mean, we need the lines to blur a little more. I think that will make for better content in across all the media.
Smriti, and both Manjuji also will come to this. Related to this, you can the villain part of it, or having masala, is the aspect of creative liberty which you take to spice up a story. You talked about Urmila. If you could talk about Urmila and the creative liberty you took in, as you were mentioning in our conversation before this, that Urmila decides to have an abortion, which is very, very, like, I don't know how you got through the editors on that, but that's the kind of, and Manjuji, after she has said, what kind of creative liberties you take in the fiction that you create and in your academic pursuits?
So that was actually the easiest part in the entire book, because I very cleverly chose a character in the Ramayana that was the least written about or talked about. So anything that I wrote about Urmila could not be challenged because there was nothing written about Urmila in the ancient version scriptures. Regional retellings, yes, a lot. And then there were these hints and everything from which you could take something and make it plausible. So you do know that Sita and Urmila are sisters, and their father is Janak, their kingdom is Mithila. You do know for a fact that they don't have any brothers, so there are no male heirs to pass the throne on to. But no author till date has ever even thought of making Urmila the heir to her father's throne, Mithila. Yeah. Why? Because we have such a Doordarshan version of it in our heads that is just stuck. But why has nobody challenged? It's right there. Who is going to inherit that kingdom? There is actually no male heir. So it's, can somebody challenge that? But it's nowhere is it written who the next heir to Mithila would be. Nowhere is it written that Urmila was asked, could not become. So these are just gray areas that I have I've played it to my advantage, because nobody can challenge this, because the character to a lot of people was just not significant enough or important enough to go into these details. But one is lucky that is mythology. But if one comes to historical fiction, that is something, if one has to go against researchers, then as a fiction writer, you better have your reasons for it. But my other experience in writing historical fiction on Yashodhara, I was lucky again there, because there is nothing written about her. People are not even sure if Yashodhara is Gautam Buddha's wife's name. It could be Bhadra Kanchana as well, which a few Chinese historians have mentioned. So for a woman whose name we are not even sure about, who was she, we just know who her parents were, what was she like, did she have an accident as a child, nobody can question that because nothing has been written about it. So that is a very sweet spot that I've chosen, where I get all the creative liberty in the world. Everything is just fiction except for the name of the character and who she was and how she was related. So, been lucky.
Manjuji.
In this exchange that we've had, 2 or 3 points stand out before me. One is about the sex and violence and the so-called masala, and the other is the historical aspect of a tale that you're telling. Talking about the first, I would say that, this is where gatherings like this, literature festivals and discussions, can actually make a difference. The question to be asked is, do we really require that kind of masala? Do we really require those ingredients to make our stories reach out to a wider public? And because we are on the stage, so to speak, we can actually send across this message that these things are not really required. Yes, there is violence in the world, but by focusing only on the violence and the sex and the bad words, what are we doing to the next generation? I know I'm talking like a teacher, but I've spent most of my life as a teacher, and I'll still repeat the same thing even if you disagree. You will say that this happens in the world outside. You find people talking like that. Yes, but is it not your duty and mine to see that at least our children, in our families, people don't use this kind of violence? They don't treat women like that, like objects, and they don't use F words and so on, mother, sister, galis and so on. So it's part of our responsibility, I think. And in literature festivals, that is what we need to do. Excuse me, but I have been to literature festivals where from the stage we have somebody using F words and drinking and being bohemian. Now that is not really being artistic. And I don't think that is the kind of thing we ought to be doing. Sorry, school mom in me, huh? And the other point about the historical fiction that you're talking about, you say that you picked up characters that nobody has written about and nobody will take offense, but you never know what's going to happen 20 years down the line. Somebody may say that, oh, my great-great-great-grandfather was related to someone who knew Urmila, and how can you do this? And there might be a stir against your book, and you may become famous all over again. Yeah, that can happen.
How was your academic interest? How does academic calling influence the fiction that Amalta's Avenue or Scandal Point or Gumshoe? How have you struck that balance between?
Just as when you are making a film or an OTT or whatever, you need to know the blueprint, you need to draw out a plan, and you have to know the ropes. You have to know what bricks to use in order to build an edifice. So similarly, if you're writing a story, it is better if you have the blueprint in mind. And I have been teaching literature, how stories are written, how essays are written, how plays are written, and so on, for so many years. So one does get the hang of it. Even if you're not teaching that per se, still, you do know what works and what doesn't work. And I was fortunate, I had to teach a narratology course in which I had to explain how the story progresses, what are the various ways in which a story can progress, how can it begin? Narratology, narratives and narratology, yeah. So I brought out a book also on that. And also the narrative voice, whose voice, and these are things that come into your film script, in your OTT, and whatever you are writing. So that makes it very, very useful. You know about metafiction, for instance. You know about the tale within a tale. You know about how one thing leads to another. And moreover, what's most important, because we are all dealing with classical literature so much in this particular festival, you know that all our stories go back to the Arabian Nights, they go back to Aesop's fables, because there is something common. There's something common in the story within a story, and one narrator giving way to another, the Panchtantra, for instance. Yeah, so that kind of a training helps you write a story better, frame a story better. The rest comes with your exposure to lived experience, it depends on your vocabulary, it depends on the kind of reading you've done. For instance, I am mainly a poetry person, and I've taught a lot of poetry. So in my writings, a lot of poetry gets into the story, and well, my readers like it too. As I said, I'm not really into marketing. A lot of people have told me that your books would make excellent films, and I've got 2 people sitting next to me who are into it. I would love it if they read my books and think of making films about them, because
We
I've really
definitely
been
shall.
told that. Yeah, but let me pass on the mic to somebody
Yeah.
else.
You see,
Sir, actually, I wanted to make a point on the Shotajit Ray and Manmohan Desai
Yeah.
bit that you spoke about. So, very recently, in international cinema, we've had a beautiful example like the Korean film Parasite.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought there's a reason it's won 13 Oscars. And I thought that was a lovely space between Manmohan Desai's Masala and Shotajit Ray's poverty and the reality of a lot of people living in those basements and semi-basements in that place. And there's no actual real villain over there. You are bleeding for everyone, every character. The real villain is poverty.
Yeah.
And which is why it has worked in every country, every culture, every language, because that is something. You're sitting in the US, you're sitting in New Zealand, you're sitting in the Middle East, and sitting in India or Korea. Yeah.
Please don't say that in front of a Bengali. Like,
I'm from Calcutta.
You'll have a riot on your hand.
Yeah. So, and there's a reason it resonated because it had Ray's reality, which is poverty and how the masses live, and how a small weather change is something of just like a casual inconvenience to the rich, and the poor have lost everything, right? And it was just those class differences, and it's universal. It was a classic, and no cuss words, and which is recently the lowest hanging fruit. As a writer, I would just like to say that if you're talking about Srijit Mukherjee talking about, like say, the lanes of Khidirpur and the reality of that character, if you actually took somebody from Khidirpur, from that class, that person is not watching Baishe Shrabun. That person is watching Ma'am's shows, Balika Vadhu, Astitva, all of those shows. Why? Because as creators, we are constantly jolting the comfortable. The Parasite is for us, it's for our class. And we are comforting the jolted. So let them watch their K-drama, K-serials, Ekta Kapoor serials, because that's aspirational. Hi, kitni sundar saadi hai, earrings kitne achhe hain, shaadi mein pakka ye wala design mein pehne wali hu. So that is for them, this is for us. So when one talks about cuss words and everything, if that is the outcome, keeping the authenticity of the character and the universe intact, then I don't think I would mind it. Because if a character like that speaks like that, then that is their reality. But if I have a nonsense story and I'm just trying to put this masala and just putting it out there, hey, this is nice, there's a lot of sex and there's a lot of abuses in this, I don't think even the audience buys it anymore. So
I can't help but wanting to step in at this point because you mentioned Balika Vadhu. I must share this experience that when we started the show, the first reaction, it was the first episode and it was the first day for that particular channel. So everything was new and we didn't even have a proper office where we would go and actually pitch the story, and how we had absolutely no idea what an iconic show it would become. The first reaction of people in the 3 or 4 episodes when we started was, "ये तो बिल्कुल दूरदर्शन जैसा show है." It is, and what was the reason for that? The reason was because we'd chosen a rural setting. The reason we had chosen a rural setting was because we believed that at that point of time, with all the K shows that were on air, we needed to do something different. We needed a different visual. We needed something more real. Having said that, when this started filtering into our ears about the fact that it was a rural show, it was such a DD show, we upped the color factor in the show. We started padding it up with very beautiful costumes. There's even a shop called Bindani which has opened recently in Santa Cruz, and I get very kicked every time we pass by that shop, because it was a word that even I didn't know existed before I started working on the show. So we chose a certain formula, which is what I loved about what Smriti was describing, that you have to first believe that it is possible to speak something relevant and realistic and fictionalize it or colorize it to the extent that it is required to make it palatable to people. Two, three very surprising findings in the process of doing Balika Vadhu. One, for the life of me, I could not figure out why this show had a very high ratio of male viewership. And there was no logical reason for it, because it was a story of a little girl who was not allowed to study because they wanted to get her married, and that was the most decent and acceptable and secure thing for the parents to do. So, what was it about the whole show? I think it was because this girl and her performance, and some of the credit to the writing too, that we were able to make people feel for the character. So if once you manage that, even if you need to sort of up your game in terms of how it's looking visually, you're still able to get your point across. That's what we tried to do in Balika Vadhu, and I think that was the reason why it ran for 8 years, and people couldn't have enough of it, and sort of got translated into dubbed in 172 languages.
Yeah. I just have one question short to that.
I think there's not working. Oh, sorry, now it's working. Just to add to ma'am's show Balika Vadhu, when the show came on, I was a student in Jamia studying mass comm, and we had this very famous producer, Shelja Kejriwal, who, for the uninitiated, she brought Zindagi channel to this country, and she brought all the Pakistani dramas over here. And the last revolution in TV had been in the year 2000, when Kyunki Saas Bhi Kahi Bahu and KBC on the same day premiered in non-fiction and fiction, changing the history of the channel, Star Plus. And the next revolution, she told us, was Balika Vadhu. And why it worked was because suddenly the demographic had changed, and we had TV screens in villages, and our maids and house helps now had TVs in their houses. That was the TG, that was the target group that we were actually catering to in TV. And the middle class had sort of moved on from television, and now it was this particular class. And what she talked about, the whole comfort, the jolted, that's what that show did, comforted the jolted. It was that same class, it was the same tier 2, tier 3 villages and everything. But look how beautifully they told that story.
Yeah, please.
Just one small point. We've been talking about reality and imagination, the real and the fictional. And I would just like to make one point that human beings cannot bear too much reality. And this is a quotation from T.S. Eliot. Human beings cannot bear too much reality, and sometimes when reality becomes unbearable, it is the imagination that comes to your rescue. And a little while ago, you mentioned the collection of stories that was titled COVID's Metamorphosis. COVID's metamorphosis. You see, during the COVID times, we all went through a very bad time. And those of us who were into education, we just moved online. We started doing our lectures online. We started having lectures, seminars, conferences online. And one of the things that we did was we sent out a call for short stories based on the COVID experience. We got stories from all over. And finally, we selected 20 or 27 of them, and we brought it out in a Kindle form as COVID's Metamorphosis. So a lot of people told me then that, working on those stories actually kept them going. It helped them tide over that difficult COVID period, because at least they could live in a world where they could intellectualize the experience.
Yeah.
So imagination does come to our rescue.
Just one closing comment for, this is something, again, Gajra, you brought up in our discussion we were having. Fictionalized reality and realistic fiction, with your preference for the second, you have a preference. If you could, as closing comments from all three of you on aspects that your work addresses, you know. And then we have
As you mentioned, the toss-up, it's a very fine line between realistic fiction and fictionalized reality. So when you're talking about nagins and when you're talking about flies who turn into human beings and vice versa, you are definitely talking about fictionalized reality. I don't subscribe to that category. But yes, I have done a lot of work, tried to make my fiction stem from reality, because I was trained as a journalist, though I didn't follow that profession for much time. So I've had this sort of, I'm almost accused at times that, why do you want to be so logical stroke real in your takeoff point for stories, or trying to find those plot points which actually are real and not fiction. But I think to my last writing day, I'll try and stick to realistic fiction, because I totally believe in it.
There has to be verisimilitude, as it is called, in any work of fiction. And yes, we do run a risk. We can hurt people with our stories if they are much too grounded in reality. But then what comes to our rescue is that disclaimer: this is a work of fiction, and any similarity with any person or event, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. So I think we fall back on that.
change that this is a work of fiction based on life.
Very short statement. Agree with exactly what she said. When I'm writing fiction, it is fiction. When I'm doing documentaries, it is purely reality. We even take permissions from people, and one can land in real trouble if one goes. And I'm not talking about reality TV. That is something else, debatable. So yeah, if it's fiction, then even if I'm being inspired by a real character, I would like to give the disclaimer that lots of parts of this story are fiction, and if one can take it, one takes it. If you can't digest it, then don't pick it up.
So we'll open the floor for questions. Does anybody have a question?
Two of y'all are screenwriters as well as novelists as such. Two different mediums, and assuming on a day's work, you are supposed to do both, right? How do you transition between one? Because these are, there could be mental blocks, that could be a lot of other things as such. Reason I'm asking is because I am also taking baby steps in both. So.
Taking from what your question the curiosity about this, I get asked this question many times actually. You don't have to do it all in a day. You can do it in a few days at a time. What I've realized is that, frankly, teamwork, which screenwriting involves, you've got to, end of the day, please a lot of people. And you've got to take them along with you, because just you believing in your story or the subject which has been given to you to develop is not going to work. So to carry, a disparate team of 12 people in the channel and 8 in the production company to get your episode passed is sometimes more than a Herculean task. So I usually alternate between that whole energy which is required to do this kind of teamwork, and then when I just can't take it anymore, I go back to find my inner voice, to write stories which I don't have to please anybody, the result of which is Autumn Blossoms recently. So I alternate in phases. Huh?
It pleased me.
That's a relief. So I alternate in phases. I wouldn't call it all in a day, because television work always takes a lot of priority because of the deadlines involved. So as a relief, I write my books.
Just switch it on. It must be switched off.
This one?
Hello?
There's a question.
Yeah.
So I had asked her this exact same question. 15 minutes before the session started because I'm very new to this literature and juggling TV at this. And like she said, if you're a TV writer, you are a 24/7 chemist shop. You'd never shut shop because the episode is always going out. So and exactly what she said. You're writing when you're writing for in the industry, you are writing for 10 different entities. You're writing for a producer, for a director, for an actor. Then an editor comes and that's another layer. You somewhere, because that's such a collaborative process, anything that goes on screen, you are not reading our screenplays, right? You are watching it on screen. But my book you can read. That is me directly to you. So that, I think all of that comes from that hunger that she said, that what is my entire 100% story that is unfiltered by, like, you know, anybody, untouched by anybody else, and this is exactly me, and you can actually read it. If I was to do it my way, this is how I would do it. And that is where it comes from. When we are very disturbed by that, we come to this.
Your question.
So my question is that this month's most hit movie, Animal, the way they showed girls, females, males treating girls, and it became India's highest grossing adult film till now. So why people are actually going to the theater and having a watch of such kind of films? As per you, I mean, as per your expert opinion, yeah.
My very first producer gave me an example that has stayed with me for life. And he had explained to me, he said, अगर एक ही जगह पे आपको एक सेब का ठेला मिलेगा और उसके ही साथ में आपको पान पराग, सॉरी आई डोंट नो इफ आई एम सपोज्ड टू टेक ब्रांड नेम्स और नॉट, बट पान मसाला मिल जाएगा, तो आप देख लो कहाँ पे ज़्यादा भीड़ होने वाली है. तो भीड़ हमेशा पान मसाले की दुकान में होगी, लेकिन हमको अपने सेब बेचने बंद नहीं करने चाहिए. We should still believe that an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and eat them, sell them, value them.
That's a very good point.
Yeah, absolutely. And because you mentioned that, I have been asked by my producer to go watch Animal. I have to watch it tomorrow because I have received a text that the next film we are writing is going to be something similar. And when I asked similar in what sense, in the violence, the action, or the misogyny, and he said, I haven't seen it as yet, so but I've heard enough. He said, don't diss it till you've watched it. If you're a fan of Quentin Tarantino and John Wick, then you would have something good to say about it. And that's when I went and watched Kabir Singh and Arjun Reddy, all of that. And my two bits about that, as a woman, I am not understanding how it is working. But I just watched 2-3 reels and I went on the comment section. And there are small bits of possessive, toxic masculinity. And you should see the comments there by young girls, the nibba nibbi culture that we're talking about right now. 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, everyone tagging their boyfriend, ye to ekdam tere jaisa hai. They are loving it. That is, I am trying to understand.
Yeah, it's a reflection of what we are as a society.
That is why it's working.
If I can add a word out here, I have announced that we are going to have a discussion next week in which the students will participate on violence in cinema. Do we really need it? And I've told them, you don't have to see Animal in order to take part in this discussion.
Thank you so much, Gajra, Manjuji, Smriti, and Shantanu for, for me, what was very interesting was to hear you speak from your heart. I mean, like you said, we only see the, yeah, we only see that. Okay. So very short question. So we, one very, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
we can manage
So,
it. Yeah.
Mike, you can
Sorry.
consider it is a question or my thought. Okay.
Comments, yeah.
Comment. Okay. So while integrating reality with fiction, we need to consider logic because now audience becomes so conscious and aware. They will watch movies and ask question why there is no police in animal. Okay, so you can. I mean, we have to think about how much degree of freedom we can take to forget that logic we can add. So, what are your comments on that?
One thing I think logic is not should not be a limiting factor. Otherwise, the whole stream of magic realism, surreal writing wouldn't have been there if we followed strict logical narrative requirements. The films of Louis Buñuel wouldn't have been there. The cinema of Mrinal Sen wouldn't have been there if we followed strict logical narrative requirements. So my little understanding of that